Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Honest Youth Pastor YouTube channel, the channel that helps believers use biblical discernment in all aspects of life. Tonight, we are going to be talking about something that has, if you've been online at all, you've probably seen as far as, definitely on Twitter, Hersey's and just a whole bunch of other companies and what they support. And the thing we're going to talk about tonight on the panel is how do we as Christians spend our money in regards to these companies and what these companies support and do and all of these other things. But before we get into it, I want to bring over the panel tonight. Hey guys, how's it going? How's it going?
What's going on, man? What's happening?
All right, we have. It is. It's Tuesday. It's the Tuesday night live stream. It's a
Tuesday
fun time.
Night Live.
It's a fun time. All right. So we have. I think if you're on here a lot, you know a lot of these guys. But if not, let's just go introduce ourselves real quick. Jason, if you want to start us off, tell us your name.
Most certainly. I'm Jason from Dear Woke Christian, the podcast. I am a husband of one, a father of two, and I'm looking forward to chopping it up with you guys on this evening, having a good discussion. So thanks for having me, man. Thanks for the invite.
All right. And then Matt, Josh, you want to introduce yourselves real quick?
I am the notorious Matty V.
Is that all you got? Just Matthew V?
Is that it?
That's all I got.
Like when's your next album dropping? Something, man. Come on.
No other explanation necessary. It's self-explanatory.
Okay. Notorious.
Okay.
Gotcha.
The notorious Matt. I love it.
What's up, Josh?
Fun. So, Joshua Bish, husband of one, father of three.
There you go.
All girls. But we've taught them to love Star Wars, so that's what we do. I feed those flames, and we can all watch stuff together and get along very well. I also teach them the Bible, but Star Wars.
I love it. Well, that's always good.
There you go. Yeah, you should do that. All right. So guys, the main thing I want to talk about tonight, right, is because this came up the other day actually at church, whenever me and my buddy were talking and we got into the subject of, the conversation he had at work specifically was with a worship pastor that works actually in the same profession he does. And they got to talking about the infamous, what songs do you play and where does that money go conversation. And then it sort of morphed into, well, as Christians then, how do we spend our money elsewhere? And that just happened to intersect perfectly with the whole Hershey's thing that had come out as far as Hershey and that whole commercial with the transgender individual that was promoting it. And then obviously Daily Wire came out with their candy and the opposite of it.
Hilarious.
And it started this really interesting conversation that one of the things I appreciate about the Tuesday Night live stream is it's not just me talking and me just like reverberating back into my own ears. You guys all have like different opinions that are always super helpful. So what I wanted to talk through is like this whole idea of how we as believers spend our money. Now, before we get into it real quick, though, I wanted to bring up, I brought some graphs. Hold on, I've got to bring Jason back. Okay, I brought some.
What is that about, man?
I don't know why it's doing this, bro. It's every time I switch a screen. But anyway, so I wanted to bring in some graphs. I wanted to bring in a little conspiracy tonight. A little conspiracy.
Carol.
So. It's really easy for us to say like, oh, well, we can't support Hershey's because Hershey's does this or that. So we're just as Christians not going to spend our money on Hershey's, right? But when you look at, hold on, where's my graphs? So there right here, right, this is basically all your food, beverage, health and beauty products are all owned by basically these 11 companies. So as soon as you say, hey, I'm not going to support Hershey's, then basically you have all of this other stuff here as far as like, well, okay, are you going to support, I don't know, any other, Oreos? Are you going to support, all this? If you buy Pepsi at all, let me just tell you, they have their hands in everything. They have oatmeal, they have Gatorade, they have chips. They have, there's the point, right? So then you also have this whole, Disney Plus and do I support Disney? Well, Disney owns a ton of stuff. You can't watch any sports, right? You got your ESPN up here. You can't do anything as far as family entertainment. You got just all this breakdown. And then you got this chart here that's really hard to read, which I'm not even going to get into as far as who owns what in the tech space, which is just everything. So the conversation goes like this after I put Jason back in for again. Okay, so this is the conversation then, right? So how do we as believers say, okay, well, we want to spend our money wisely. We obviously
Mhm.
don't want to support companies that are, terrible, and support terrible things that are against the scriptures. But how, with that knowledge of like these 11 companies own almost all of our food and beauty and health products. So how do we do this reasonably? Now I have like my breakdown, but I don't want to talk first. I want to pick your guys' brain because what you may say might make me be like, oh, I don't want to. I'm stupid. so let's start here. What are your guys' thoughts on this? Like, how does real life effects that maybe you've put into place in regards to this, as far as your conscience and your convictions? Has this affected you at all? What have you done? Jason, as our guest, man, you want to go first or no?
Let's do it. Let's do it. So I talked about this on my show a couple months ago. I believe Disney's against the ropes in certain areas. And I think if Christians just stop supporting Disney, we would see a significant change in that. Because at the end of the day, it's really Christians that are supporting it. I mean, if Christians would say, hey, you know what? Yeah, we probably can't, stand up to everything on the planet, but we're going to stop going. You don't need to go to Magic Kingdom. For what? For what? For what? You wouldn't go in June, then don't go now. So like, just stop doing it. Just stop. There's nothing on there that you really need. Cause I think we're not talking about it as much, but we're over entertained. It's not like we don't have we're overstimulated. So the idea, the notion that the pushback that your kids need something to entertain them, no, they need you to parent them. And I'm getting the business too, but we don't have Disney Plus. I think my sister-in-laws gave my daughters their password. I'm gonna call Disney and be like, hey, don't y'all got that one password thing, so they can get it revoked. But so that would be my pushback. Like, hey, if we just stopped supporting them, if they don't support what you believe in, and again, that map right there is that's pretty serious. I agree. Like, it's hard to say you're gonna make a big difference, but why don't you just stop? Who cares? You're not gonna make a big difference. That's fine. But why are you participating in it? Oh, just because everybody else is? Really? Is that what we're gonna honestly say? If your conscience is pricked that Disney is wilding out, and I believe Disney is wilding out, I think they don't care at all remotely about your Christian ethics, your Christian morals, anything. Forget that. Just basic morals. Okay. I don't even think they even care about that. So why are you supporting them? I think is a much better question. And they don't. And the very last thing is, somehow or another, we've gotten this idea that corporations deserve our money. Like, I got to support them. No, you don't. You really don't. You really don't. You can find some other forms of entertainment. You can find some much better ways to engage with your family than plopping them down and letting them watch a phony princess story. Like, just stop it. So that would be my pushback. Like, just stop.
Awesome. Okay, Matt, what do you got?
Oh yeah.
My soundboard is not working, so we're just gonna stop on that right now. It's just acting
That's because
up,
you
so-
keep dissing me, man. That's why you keep pushing me off of here. I got some sound effects too. So hey, and mine works.
Yeah, there you go.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I definitely think a lot of this comes down to personal conscientious decisions, and
Mhm.
that if one person or family or church tradition feels strongly one way or another, that we as Christians should support one another in the case of, okay, if you feel this way, then I support you in that, because to go against conscience, in the words of Martin Luther, is neither right nor safe. And in the words of the Apostle Paul, that whatsoever is not of faith is sin. And James says that if someone knows to do right, and that right can either be objective or subjective, conscientious right,
Mhm.
and does it anyways, they defile their own conscience. And also, Paul to the Corinthians lays out some good principles in terms of those with weaker and stronger consciences, and being sure that in your own freedom, or in your own wideness of conscience, that you do not cause others to stumble. And he
Mhm.
gives the example with meat offered to idols, because he says there may be some new weak believers who have not gotten the whole monotheism thing kind of pat down yet, because they've come out of paganism. And so if they see a Christian who is in the market or is essentially outside of a certain temple eating meat that has obviously come out of the temple, that you can actually cause your brother to stumble. And so Paul goes to the extreme where he says, I would rather not eat meat at all than eat meat and cause my brother to stumble. And he goes into all kinds of different practical aspects of that. And at the same time, I would say that it is possible to live outside and exterior the influences of modern Western society. There are people all over the place who live off the grid, who are self-sustaining. You even have historical traditions like, for instance, even the Mennonites and the Amish. I know that's taken it to maybe to some people quite an extreme, but that is their conscience. That is the way that they have been led of God to live and to conduct their lives. And so I think that it, like I said, it ultimately comes down to when we're dealing with very specific application. I think that it ultimately lands on the position of the believer and their own standing before the Lord. So those are my preliminary thoughts.
All right. Josh, what do you have? Because you like the Star Wars. The Star Wars is owned by the Disney. So what is your take
point.
here? So
Yeah, right. This is good. So you've unwittingly brought on an expert, having been raised Baptist. We solely identify as that by which we are against. So my whole life, man,
got you. Subject matter expert.
Boycotting. We're not buying that brand of clothing. We're not eating this, that, or the other, right? Except for Disney. Disney was always allowed. Jason's spot on, right? Like,
I don't understand it, but yes.
So I will say this. So my position is I'm fairly indifferent, to be honest, at this point. I think it's ironic to me that the only reason we know to be outraged about this situation is because I'm willing to bet each of us found out about it on a social media platform that is gay and transgender affirming. And we are currently discussing it on a platform, YouTube, that is gay and transgender affirming. So should we back this out and do it via snail mail, right? Just writing letters back and forth like they did however many hundreds of years ago? Or do we take advantage of the platforms that we have to discuss these ideas? I understand that it's a slight distinction, what I'm saying with this and going to the Disney park and subscribing to various things. But I think if we're going to live in this world in 2023, we're going to interact and participate with these technologies. And we're tacitly supporting them at that point. Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Google, right? They're like they're the top. Like they're probably on some crazy dispensationalist's list in a basement somewhere while he's fashioning a gas mask from 2-liter bottles, right? Like that's probably what's going on.
How do you know that?
Don't worry, bro.
How do you know about my 2-liter gas mask?
Right.
I mean, I haven't looked that stuff up online.
Okay, cool. So that's actually a very interesting point. So one of the things that we kind of had on this discussion on Sunday morning was basically that so I'll use this as sort of a transition point to kind of pick your guys' brains, right? So this is where I've landed on it, because the very interesting thing is we got into this conversation, that was my friend's point, was like, well, do you just not use anything then? Because at that point, like everything we have, those charts are just one example of how tied together everything is. And so for me, because I've had to really think through this, especially because of just of having kids and everything that they interact with and how that works. And so, like for me, there's two distinctive categories. There's things that I need to have, and there's things that I want to have, right? So the wants would be like Disney Plus. The wants would be, chocolate bar to make me fatter. Just all of these other things that are in the wants that are not necessarily needed things, right? That aren't benefiting really any long-term goal other than just wasting my money. And then there are need things, right? So I'm gonna have to eat. There's no way I can't eat. So unless I want to grow all of my own food, like Matt was saying, as far as Mennonites go.
which is Paul. Which I'm not a Mennonite, but like we're about to put out a big old garden,
Yeah.
right here in the next few weeks that we can live off of. So
Yeah. So, and that's the thing, right? So there are people within my extended family that like we'll get a cow from, well, we won't personally get a cow, but we will have somebody that has a cow that will then give us meat from it. So there are ways to do that. But at the end of the day, for me, there's wants and needs. So there's certain things that like, I mean, I can't in my property do a whole farm, but I know people that can. So you can buy local as much as possible. But I think there does come a point to where you have to be like, all right, I obviously don't have to have Disney Plus, and just so you know, I canceled that a long time ago whenever all those videos were coming out. But secondly, it's one of those things where, and that's a good question that somebody's bringing up in the comments right now, what about work, right? I work for a company that was on one of those lists. So how do I then get around that? So that, I think, falls into the need category. I have to provide for my family, and within that company, I am going to, until forced to affirm something, going to keep working there. And then, so that would be a need versus a want, which would be a Disney Plus, which I canceled, versus a want, which would be a chocolate bar that I don't actually need and probably isn't doing me any good in the end. And so I think we all have to process that through. To Jason's point, right? The whole Disney thing. There were many years where we went like every third year that as soon as this whole thing came out and all these videos were coming out and we canceled Disney Plus, me and my wife just had the conversation. Clearly we're done there. I mean, here's the thing, that sounds easy for adults until you have to have that conversation with your kids and they're used to going. And you have to explain to them, I get that this is something that was fun. This was something that you enjoyed, but this is why we're not doing this anymore. And
Okay,
so
I
I think, yeah.
All right, so I got to jump in. I agree with you to the fullest extent. That's an excellent point. But I think one of the things, and I've heard this in doing some sermon reviews of the guy whose church points north here in Atlanta. He pointed out in it that many people don't live their faith, so the next generation, the kids, won't take them seriously. So maybe they need to see, like, oh yeah, mom and dad were really serious. They weren't just trying to get brownie points at the Baptist cookout and potluck, but they really were serious about this thing, and that's why we stopped doing Disney. Like, I think they need to see that, like, oh, you really were convicted about this, and you really did stand on it. I do think that needs to be seen by our children. Whether the Lord uses that as a means to draw them in, I don't know. But at least we can say, hey, we stuck by our guns. Yeah, I had fun too. I had fun going there with y'all. Yeah, but I no longer want to do it because I wouldn't be able to do it in June. So I'm not going to do it in November. So I think by us sticking to our guns, we make more of a ripple than we think we do if we stick to our guns. And then second of all, I think the designation between things that we have to do, like somebody asked about work, you got to work. There's not really much I can say about that. Now we can get into the fine details that the Lord is convicting your heart that you should not work at Hersey's, or the Lord is convicting your heart about working at Amazon. Then you go with the Lord. Don't follow me. Don't listen to anybody here. Listen to what the Lord is leading you. On the same note, the wants, the things that I want to do, I think every last one of those should be on the table. Every last one of them. And I personally believe, and I could be wrong, and feel free to let me know in the chat down below, I believe if more Christians stop supporting Disney's movie products, that movie products would change significantly. I just believe that because they're suffering. They're suffering for the last year and a half, almost 2 years. Everything they've put out has been terrible. And they literally they almost lost $60 million, please forgive me, on the most recent Marvel movie. When they used to put out anything Marvel was a barn burner. Now it's hardly even wet timber. So I think if Christians just stop supporting that stuff, they would see a change in that deliberately, because Disney would be like, look, we can't make no money like this. We can't make money like this. Nobody's watching our movies. That y'all think it's do you think it's odd that the new Peter Pan movie is being put on Disney Plus and not in the box office? You know why? Because they know they're going to get their heads handed to them. Nobody's going to go see it. So that way they can cover how many people don't see it by putting it on Disney Plus versus putting it in the theater, because they would get shellacked. But why is that? Because people are not watching their stuff. If Christians stopped watching their stuff and stood by their guns, it's going back to my original point, I think they would see, even in just one instance, like, oh, y'all, we got to stop this. because we following after this woke crowd, and they're not coming to support our movies. They want representation, but they're not representing these dollars. These Christian folk and these other people that have different moral compass, they are not coming to our shows, and we're emptying out theaters. We probably need to stop doing this. I think it would happen in our lifetime. That's it.
Gotcha. So as far Matt, Josh, whichever one of you guys want to go, I mean, how do you make that distinction then, as far as like in your own personal lives that might help somebody? Do you have a similar paradigm, or how do you necessarily work that out? Right. So
Like between needs and wants, or
yeah, just this idea of saying, okay, I have these convictions that clearly these companies aren't supporting. So like Jason said, is it a matter of you saying, okay, is it a needs and wants, or is it a whole the whole thing we don't support? I mean, how do you approach that?
I mean, I think that every single company out there, like if we go back to those charts that you had, every single one of them is going to affirm an ideology that I don't agree with, period. And that's probably every single streaming service, everything that's available. So for me, I'm much more loose with that. Actually, technically, I don't have Disney Plus. I have someone's password. So,
boy,
right?
Let me call Disney on you.
I pay him for it, so. But,
well,
anyway,
it's like a sublease. It's like a sublease.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Now that money is helping him get through Bible college. So,
okay.
The thing about this for everything, for me, it goes back to what Matt said about conscience. And for me, I'm okay watching Star Wars on Disney. I'm okay watching Mandalorian season 3, and Andor was really, really good. And they're putting out good material in that realm. I agree all the current Marvel movies have been trashed because they're so woke. But Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau are still putting out really good stories. And they're stories that my children can watch and understand. They're stories that are complex enough that I'm able to walk them through and help them understand literally how things are working. We can trace plot development. We can trace parallelism, right? We can understand all of those things, how a plot works. And now they're getting supplemental knowledge to what we're teaching them in our classical homeschooling that we do with them, to where they're able to take what they're learning on the classical level and they can apply it now to what's going on in 2023. And when they have a good understanding of how language and stories work, now when they go and they read Ruth the next time, we can start talking about parallelism. We can talk about plot devices and structure, and they're going to have an understanding of the Old Testament that's much better. So I'm okay with the Clone Wars and all these other things. I've watched it with them, and I'm very comfortable with that. We don't go out and just explore anything that's out there, right? And I think that's where, one, as Christians, this is where when Christ said to be as innocent as doves and as wise as serpents, this is a good place to do that and to be out there and aware of what's going on. Now, for me personally, that doesn't mean that I have license to watch anything. Right? That's certainly not what I'm advocating. So don't go out and watch Game of Thrones or any of that other garbage, right? For the sake of plot devices or whatever. Like that's foolishness. But I do watch other things, things that are rated R and whatever else, to see what I can glean out of them and learn and apply. And those lessons, the lessons that you learn in the fictional world, are as valid as what you learn in real life. And it affords you the opportunity to gain wisdom through someone else's writing and characters that you can apply to your life. And so if secular companies are putting out good literature and good plot devices, that's something that we're able to learn from, and it makes us that much better at understanding story and narrative. And I think that helps us when we approach scripture to interpret it and understand how the authors were building. Like Genesis isn't just individual stories for 50 chapters, right? Moses built that entire narrative and uses parallel structure from chapter 1 to 50 so that we can get to Exodus, so that we can get to a covenant, to another covenant, to another covenant, to the cross. And it's all cohesive. And as you can understand that, you will be a better Christian. And a place to go out and get the reps in the real world are on some of these places that are streaming, Netflix, HBO, Disney. Right? It's not a license to watch whatever you want. You have to exercise wisdom, be as wise as a serpent in that regard, right? And as innocent as a dove. But if your conscience can handle it, there can be value there. Again, this isn't licensed to go watch whatever you want, right?
So I want to definitely touch on that point before we move any further, though, Matt. Like, what is your distinction as far as, I mean, because I know you're coming at it sort of at a different angle here as far as you don't have kids. This is just you. Like, so how do you process through that? Because, I mean, almost all of my processing is seen through the lens of the fact that I have kids.
Right.
Yeah. Is that question directed towards me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I know for myself, when I was growing up, we had no television, we had no internet, we had no computers. We, my parents were just very, very protective in that way. We were in the Pentecostal holiness movement, and so on a pretty regular basis, we heard about that if you even had a television in your house, you were on your way to hell. So that's the atmosphere that I grew up in, and
Sounds like a blast.
it was a blast. But I am saying that there are some similarities to what we're discussing here,
Yeah.
and also that mentality at the same time, because the idea is that, especially with the internet, that if we get a computer and we hook this up to the internet, you get free access to anything and everything that's out there. Everything from pornography to the Church of Satan's website to anything and everything. And so it's kind of like, as soon as we're plugged into the internet, it is essentially, we're getting free what we would have gotten from any subscription that we get from anywhere else. And so, again, it goes back to a personal conviction, because that was my parents' personal conviction for us as we were growing up. Like, they grew up with television and going to the movies, and like we weren't even allowed to listen to music that was not Christian and praise and worship. When I was growing up, the only time that my ears were allowed to even be in the same room with a non-Christian song was once a year. On my parents' anniversary, they would play Randy Swift, "I'm Gonna Love You Forever, Forever and Ever, Amen." And so I'm pretty sure it was just because it had the "Forever and Ever, Amen" in there, and that was like their song. And like, growing up, I mean, I literally believed and felt that it was a sin to listen to country music. Like, we would get up and leave the room if anything that was not of God was played, because kind of the general mantra was, if it is not of God, then it is against God. And so it had to be explicitly Christian for it to enter our atmosphere. Now that myself and my sister are old and we're in our 30s, my parents have relaxed quite a bit. But I do appreciate certain aspects of that. I think they even kind of look back and can see a little bit of the unnecessary extremes in that, and like the necessity for personal discernment and such. But I will just say it this way. If you look at things like, we'll take the Puritans and the Quakers, or just in general the Pilgrims who left England. They left England because they wanted out of that whole religious political turmoil and such. Now, they didn't have to leave, but they chose to leave and to take that extreme measure in order to achieve what they felt led of God to achieve. And so I think that it is entirely possible, and it happens in people's lives, that someone may get so convicted and so touched and so impacted negatively from society that they do pack up and move off the grid. No more television, no more internet, no more radio. We're going out, we're going to buy heirloom seeds, we're going to buy our own animals, we're going to do homeopathic medicines and stuff. And like, it happens all the time, and a lot of them don't even do it for religious reasons. And so I think that all of that plays into a factor. And one thing that I kind of revert back to is, even beyond just entertainment, I think back to the situation a previous couple of years ago with, I'm trying to think of the right word to use here so we don't get the little censor, but the with the jab and the formula that went into that. I did a lot of research, And a lot of people were against the jab because of the way that it was tested on stem cells that were millions of cultures past what they cultivated back in the the 20th century in Europe. And so people use that as a way to say, I'm not going to take that. However, almost, if not basically the majority of all medicines, everything from Tums to Tylenol, like almost every single brand of over-the-counter and behind-the-counter medication had been tested on those exact same things. So people who use that, saying that the jab is connected to abortion, but then go to the store and take Tylenol or take Tums for their heartburn, are doing the exact same thing. So I think that we can follow our consciences and that we can uphold certain standards and say these are good while being supportive of each other in those decisions and being consciously aware of the broader implications. And I think, and my mind also went to this in Paul speaking in 1 Corinthians 5, and then I promise I'll shut up at this point until my turn comes back again. At my local church, they all know that that there's kind of like an unspoken rule that you never let Matt have the mic unless he has to have the mic, because it's all over at that point. But anyways, Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 5, I wrote to you before in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. But then he stops and says, but not at all meaning the sexually immoral of this world, or the greedy, or the swindlers, or the idolatries of the world. For if you were to disassociate with these people, you would have to go out of the world. And the word that Paul uses here is sunanagesthusthai. Sananmigesthusthai. Yes, it's a very, very long, complicated word. And basically, it means to have intimate associations with. And Paul is here saying that if they are in the world and they are sexually immoral, or they are greedy, or they are swindlers, or they are idolaters, then that kind of association is expected. But he says, now I'm writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother if he is guilty of sexual immorality or greed, or is an idolater, reviler, drunkard, or a swindler, which is essentially the taker of usury. And so if we were to take this passage and apply it to a modern capitalistic context, if a Christian were to go to a lending agency and take money from the lending agency at an interest rate, that person would then be essentially put out of the Christian church. And Paul says, do not even sit down to eat with such a one, even if they partake in usury, just going to the bank and borrowing at interest. But Paul says,
Is it just interest though?
Yeah,
was it just
essentially.
interest? Was it any? I thought it was like an exorbitant amount. Like, we're not talking about your typical, and I could be wrong. I'm not trying to debate you.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about our typical 3% interest rate. We're talking about the payday loan type of situation, 700% interest. $1,200 payback on $300 loan, that kind of stuff. But that's what I thought usury was. But go ahead.
Well, basically, usury is anything except for basically in Old Testament context, translated into the New, anything outside of a believer or a Jew who is lending to an outsider at interest would be considered usury. And like monolithically throughout the church until the revolution of the Knights Templar and the evolution of the banking system, which resulted in basically modern capitalism, kind of like sort of turns the blind eye to usury. But you can read all through the church fathers, like usury is one of the top worst things they condemn. But anyways, he just says, for what have I to do with judging those who are outside the church? It is only those who are inside the church whom I are to judge, because God judges those outside, therefore purge the evil person from among you. So my argument is twofold. I think that We should respect and support one another in these things if that is your personal conviction. But if someone takes the very dead set, very all or nothing approach, then it has to be all or nothing, or you essentially undo yourself.
Two things to that. One, that is still in the highlights. That jab thing that Matt's talking about. It's in one of our highlights still on there. That he put all that together. That's saved as a highlight. If anybody's interested in that on the Instagram page, that is still there. Secondly, I feel like there's this whole separate topic we could talk about on Usery, but we'll have to do that later. So on Josh's point, so for the second half of the live, I think this would be interesting because this was the other half of the conversation that I had, and Josh sort of brought it up when he was talking. And I guess we've all sort of covered it a little bit. Where does it come to the point where, like, I think obviously there's this real benefit. I mean, not just of something like we're doing here, but in a much more real sense in the local church, in where iron is sharpening iron. We're kind of pushing on each other a bit. I call it like sparring. We're not fighting. I'm not coming at you to knock you out, but I am kind of testing like where your boundaries are, hoping you'll test where mine are. And so this whole idea of like somebody saying, well, that's not my conviction, and me pushing back and going, okay, yeah, but what about this, right? So like, where do you feel like this is an appropriate, well, I guess, is it an appropriate thing for brothers and sisters in the church to do? If so, like, how far do we take it? Because we had a lot of fun Sunday morning, kind of going back and forth and pushing on each other, because it's this matter of, I mean, in case you guys are watching and you don't know me, I'm a pretty hard-headed individual. Like if I'm in a spot, you're gonna have to really shove me to get me out of my spot because I'm just annoying like that. Which I have a daughter that's exactly like that, so that's super fun. But the idea is, so like in the church, I feel like this is one, it's a really good thing to do within the local body, but on the opposite side of that, we're really bad at doing it well because we assume that if I'm pushing on you, I'm trying to argue with you, in the sense that I think in general, really it's something that we're supposed to do. So if somebody says, I'm fine with, supporting Disney, and I say, yeah, but they do this, and somebody goes, right? So I think it's one of those things where do you think that has its place in the church, and how do you think we can get better at it? I guess that's my question. Jason, I'm volleying that to you.
Oh, I agree with the whole. I think we could kind of live right here with the discussion about, iron sharpening iron and how we go back and forth and discuss. I think one of the problems that many of us have is that we don't actually work out what we believe about certain things. And so we've never really thought about, like, what do I think about the pay gap debate? I don't care about it. But then when somebody comes and asks you about it or pushes you or comes and they've already thought it out, they're coming to you about it. And you're like, yeah, sure. Women should get paid the exact same as men. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yes. But they don't know all the details pertaining to it and what the actual wage gap discussion actually is. So I think by us having those kind of discussions, it does help. It does, I think, fill out some of the things so that you're not going to be pushed back easily when you meet with an unbeliever who believes, that Disney's the greatest thing and they're going to go in June or whatever, fill in the blank. But you've actually thought it out. And I think that's one of our problems, that we haven't actually taken the time to flesh out what we believe about. And just like that map that you pulled up, there's no way you're going to have an opinion about every single item in the grocery store. However, how do I handle all of this? Like, give me is it 11 companies, 12 companies that pretty much own everything in the grocery store? Mm-hmm. So it would be easy to say, okay, let me think about how do I approach all of this? I do think homesteading should probably become, be on the table. You should think about just grow some chickens, for crying out loud. I mean, just grow some chickens. And come on, nothing else. You're going to save some money there. I mean, I don't think we have to, but again, I don't think people have actually thought it out fully and say, okay, they just fine. I'm just going to keep going along with everybody else to get along. And I don't think they've thought it out fully. So that would be that's my opening on that.
Yeah. Well, and one thing before I shoot it over to Matt real quick, I mean, that's one of the things as I've kind of looked at like early church history and early believers in the 2nd, 3rd century, just what seems to be their well thought out sort of actions toward certain things in the empire of I'm not going to do this or I'm going to stand up against this simply because the gospel dictates that I must. And I just, like you said, I don't know if we've really thought that through very well.
Let
And
me ask you this: do you think the three Hebrew boys decided they weren't going to bow down to the golden statue when the music started playing? I mean, like,
yeah, they thought about that a long
right?
before. Yeah.
They probably had settled it in their hearts well before. Joseph, you do realize that the prohibition against adultery had not come down on Sinai when Joseph fled from Potiphar's wife. So he already had determined, like he knew the clear and obvious, of course, that a man sleeping with another man's wife is sin against God and against his neighbor. But he had already worked that out. He didn't need stone tablets to tell him that. He had already worked it out. So I think many of us would benefit ourselves to work some of these things out well before the music starts playing, well before somebody, is grabbing you by your coat saying, lay with me. So, because otherwise, in the heat of the moment, you're not going to make the right decision, I don't think. So that's my little 2 cents.
No, that's a good point. And Matt, I will throw it over to you real quick. But I think 2020 was that for a lot of people. This idea of saying, okay, well, clearly this could fall apart really quick for me if I do or do not do certain things. And that was really, I talked to a lot of people that started thinking, okay, so where is my line in the sand in which I do or do not do things? What is my backup plan? Do I have a backup plan? And so I think out of all of that was, I think maybe that was one shining light that came out of that really forced people to start think. Unfortunately, we're very momentary beings, so that now that time has passed, everybody's like, oh, I'm just going to go back to whatever I was doing. But I think, like you said, thinking that through is super helpful. So Matt, what do you think as far as this sparring with one another, doing it well? How do you engage in that, maybe that you found super productive?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it goes back to the principles that we already see in Corinthians with the food that has been sacrificed to idols. And I think that if you go through those chapters in Paul's epistle, that you can begin to draw parallels to certain aspects of society and apply those very same principles and just say, okay, well, instead of thinking food to idols in this particular situation, we are going to say, in this case, just general entertainment sources or general companies that provide certain foods or what have you, because ultimately it came down and Corinth was a big place, and like there was the option to buy food that had not been sacrificed to idols. You might have just had to walk somewhere else a little farther to get it. And so when we just sort of plug and play in that in that way and kind of fill in the blanks, that there are general principles that are already there for us to follow and to apply. I think that in certain ways our situations are unique because in the world that we live in, human society has never been this interconnected and has never been so predominantly just predominantly in industrial and I can't think of the right word for it, but you guys get what I mean. Just so interconnected. It's like the global village idea. We really can't get away from each other in certain ways, unless we just like go to the extremes. But at the same time, there is a big parallel that we can draw specifically between the situation in the believers in the seven churches of Asia Minor in the beginning of the apocalypse, the book of Revelation, because whereas many of the other writings in the New Testament would have taken place before the emperor cult gained traction and momentum, and the tradition of the emperors to essentially demand worship of the emperor as one of the part of the pantheon, and so that's essentially what the audience of Revelation is dealing with, and the idea of the beast and these false prophets, because they are being pressured into offering sacrifices to Caesar and calling Caesar a god. And at that time, they also started minting Roman coins that at first bore Nero's image, but then also successive Roman Caesars that would have things like, praise such and such a Caesar, the savior of the world, and like would literally use that kind of language. And Christians got to the point where they did stop using Roman coined money. They stopped going to the markets and they stopped doing these things, and they began to pay the price in their blood and in the blood of their children. And so I don't want it to get to that point, but if history tells us anything, it is a possibility that we may return to those times, and it may come down to the line that you're drawing, is whether you are going to worship the beast to put food in your baby's mouths, or whether you are going to remain true to Christ and you are going to be faithful unto death. And so I know I'm jumping the gun and going to an extreme there, but I'm saying that these conversations do have a reflection on those potentialities that increase that up the ante beyond mere entertainment or mere food brands. So,
Oh, yeah.
and that could be the direction that we're going in.
All right, I think we lost Jason. He may come back or he may not. But one thing real quick, as we I know we only got a little bit of time left, Josh. One of the things I kind of wanted to hone in on out of what you said last time, just kind of get in your brain for a second, is you were talking about watching things as far as for help and not just for entertainment. So like how do you break that down in your head then? So like as far as like watching things and using it for the benefit of teaching versus just using it for the benefit of noise, right? So like how do you foster that to where that doesn't accidentally fall from education into entertainment? Like what do you got in place there?
So in that specific regard, I was influenced by a professor in college. I took early American literature 3 times. Let that sink in.
Whoa.
Yeah. Passed it on the third go. It was a really hard class. It was brand new to me. So we had to read, like early American literature, right? So the very first novels that were written in America. That stuff is not easy reading. It's not enjoyable, right? And it includes Last of the Mohicans as part of the Leatherstocking Tales. Yep. So we watched portions of the movie, right? And he pointed out how melodramatic it was, how over the top it was, right? And forever ruined a wonderful movie for me. But that was kind of the beginning stages where I realized that here I am in Bible college, and we're reading early American literature, we're reading poetry, we are reading short stories so that we can understand how to approach literature. The Bible is literature, and it has a human authorial component. That's not detracting from its inerrancy and its divine special revelation from the Lord. And so that's where you can sit down and you can read those guys. You can read James Fenimore Cooper, and you can read Emerson and Thoreau. You can read Hawthorne. And then once you have an understanding of those guys coming out of Puritan culture and being one generation removed and how that influenced their writing, now you get a perspective on Puritan culture that you don't get from the pulpit and from the Puritans themselves, right? You're getting a different perspective on history, and you're getting it through their literature. And so you can take those principles and you can apply them to things today. So for my kids, when we watched Rebels, right, Kanan Jarrah gives his life to save all of his friends and family, right? He sacrifices himself.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, everybody, right? Big spoiler. So
that's
right. That's a significant moment of a beloved character giving their life for everyone else, right? And honestly, when I watch it, I get emotional because it's that good in terms of story writing and character development. And that was something that really struck my children because they're not used to heroes dying, right? And you're able to take that moment and say, and stop it. And it sounds cheesy, but you've got to take advantage of that moment and say, hey, listen, like, how does, Kanan dying for all those people, how does that make you feel? He sacrificed himself. It doesn't feel good, right? It's terrible. You know what? Jesus did that. And it's an easy transition right into the gospel at that point. But then there's hope, right? Because Jesus rose from the dead. Right. And now we're getting to a whole different level of story now when that hero died tragically and was in the ground for 3 days and comes back to life triumphantly. Right. Now that's a different story. and there's like some excitement behind it. And it's not just this thing that you hear once a week on Sunday that you take advantage of. And there's more and more parallels, specifically with Star Wars, but other types of literature, and that's where you can combine the educational components with that entertainment, right? There is another show, I won't even name it, that I watched that most Christians should say you shouldn't watch it, right? And I ended up in a conversation with a coworker.
Harry Potter.
I ended up in a conversation with a coworker talking about this specific show, and they're like, "Oh, did you watch that?" I said, "Yeah, I watched it." And they were, I don't know, talking about general stuff. And I said, the interesting thing to me was you're able to trace the ups and downs and the good and the positive versus the negative of the show based on the couple's marriage and how well they're operating together as a husband and wife. And when their marriage goes off the rails, the plot goes off the rails. And these people looked at me, they looked at me, I was like, "Oh, we'd never considered that," Now, it's a dark show, right? But that's baked in there because that show, while it is nihilistic and it focuses on anti-heroes, it operates within a biblical worldview where wrong is wrong and right is right. And the audience feels that tension because that's how it's presented. And when you can stand on the outside and look in and see that this has been presented in a biblical worldview, you can pull wisdom out of that and then have conversations with your coworkers about things that they've never considered and how their own lives, their own marriages affect the direction of their lives, whether it's positive or negative, how it affects their own children. And maybe that helps them start thinking about things. The interesting thing about that was after that, they're like, "Oh, so do you watch Game of Thrones?" And I said, "No, I don't watch Game of Thrones because there's too much sex in it. And I don't want to watch that." Right. And that was another instant segue where now I've set a boundary for myself and they understand that boundary about me. And now I have another easy segue into, I don't want to watch those things because I'm a Christian and I want to honor my marriage, which ironically, a lot of Christians would say I'm not doing because I watched that first show. Right. Now,
I'm super curious now. So yeah, I don't.
So we might say that for after. We'll say that for the Patreon after party.
That's what I was going to say. The viewers have no idea what goes on in the in the after parties after these lives.
We need to make a Patreon after party, but I haven't done that yet. So wrapping up.
I'll do it over at Dear Woke Christian. I'll do it real quick.
We do need to wrap up real quick. So just some encouragement for people that are maybe trying to work this out, right? So I think this is something that occurs in believers' lives, especially younger believers' lives that are trying to figure out, they're torn because they don't want to go to the extreme, but there's all these people yelling to go to the extreme, and they're just trying to figure it out. So what's some encouragement, just some really good maybe help and encouragement for them that you each have? We'll go through everybody as far as like just some advice. Like, all right, so this is what I would have told my younger self maybe as a believer on how to handle these things. Jason, what you got?
What I said earlier pertaining to working out, kind of digging deep and kind of thinking deeply about what you actually believe on certain matters. And it could be, an umbrella or specific line items, whatever like that. But that would be what I would say. I would say, Jason, young Jason, make sure you start working out what you actually believe about these topics, what you believe about these things. That would be my admonishment to anyone who's listening to this.
Gotcha. All right, Matt, what you got, buddy?
I would say that I'm just going to say all the basic stuff, to search for basic scriptural principles and sift through those in prayer, have conversations with those who are wiser than you are. In my case, that's most people that I know. And to be honest with yourself and in what you are personally, encountering and experiencing. And like I said earlier, in the case of a situation like my parents, it was probably a little more extreme than most other people that they knew, and definitely more extreme than most situations that we have now. But yet even what they did still did not go the same length as other families and other people did. But I think I turned out pretty well. So I hope so, at least. And so it's a situational thing, and I think that's what we have to remember, that we have to be careful when we have to be careful where we build walls. I guess I'll put it that way. We have to remember sometimes some walls that we build may only be temporary. Some of them may be permanent or necessary, and there's some places in our lives that don't have walls that need them.
Gotcha. Good deal. All right, Josh, what you got, bud?
Man, I love everything that these guys said. So, only I suppose two things that I'll add to the mix. One is, as you're making these decisions and putting up walls and studying things out, knowing where you stand, make sure that it's done from a position of what you are for, right? You are for Jesus Christ. You are for a relationship with God the Father. We're not to be known for what we're against. I'm not a Christian because I'm against Hershey's. I'm against drinking. I'm against smoking and chewing and hanging with girls that do those things, right? That's not what makes me a Christian. That's not what makes anyone a Christian. We are Christians positively because of who we follow and who has transformed us. So as you're doing those things, as your conscience directs you with the Holy Spirit, make sure it's from a positive understanding of who you are as a believer, so that when people ask, why don't you do this? Well, I'm a Christian and I held the conviction that, or I believe that. And I believe these things because I've read this and I have prayed about this. And this is how I think the Holy Spirit who's living and active is leading me. Right? That's a vastly different conversation than just being against things.
Yes.
The last thing that I would add that's an encouragement, I've brought it up previously, was this little book right here, The Things of Earth. Right? When I read that was paradigm shifting for me, because it basically teaches that you can enjoy God through the things of earth, whatever they may be, right? So that's food, that's drink, right? That's relationships, and a whole myriad of other things. That book is a good starting place to help you start working through some of those things. And it's wisdom. It's not going to give you the answer for every possible situation. That's not what wisdom is. Wisdom is an understanding of a principle. It's an understanding that you can take into those situations. And it's right in line with what Jason was saying, right? Wisdom is working these things out beforehand. And then when something pops up that you've never considered before, you're able to kind of go through what you've worked through in terms of wisdom and say, well, I think this principle best applies here, and that's going to govern my actions. After the fact, you'll get experience out of that, and maybe that shifts some of your thinking. You're able to see how that went. But up front, it's that wisdom and that principle, which hopefully comes from the Bible, that helps you navigate these unknown situations that arrive.
Awesome. Good deal. So the only thing I'll add before we get off here is just know yourself. I think one of the things that happens is we just don't know how we react to things. And oftentimes, like, I'm just talking like personal, my nature, unless I think through it, is very reactionary. So one of those things is to know yourself, how you react to things, to go back to Jason's point, know that before it happens. But if you do react poorly, don't beat yourself up about it. Just learn from it. There's going to be a lot of opportunities that you have that you don't do something in a situation because maybe you haven't thought about it, but don't beat yourself up about it. Just learn from it, be prepared next time, and know how you're going to react to those things. And that is going to help you a ton, not to be reactionary. I think what I used in the thumbnail was purposeful. I think the whole idea of Jeremy's candy as a reaction to Hershey's is the most nonsensical thing in the world. It's a great marketing play, but all it is sure. It's just one extreme to It's just one extreme to another, benefiting from outrage when you're not really thinking through it. You're just going to another extreme. And one of those things, I think that's very, again, when we talk about some of the fruits of the Spirit, is self-control, thinking through this, being able to process it. And, doing that well is a lifelong thing. A lot of it brought through sanctification. So just know yourself, how you react, what your proclivities are. And then I think the best thing, what you said there, Josh, at the end, was just know what you're for, and that being Christ, Him crucified, and Him resurrected, coming again. So that right there will help you define a lot of things. So guys, thank you if you got all the way through this. If you did, yeah. If you guys are watching, you liked it, make sure you actually like it. You do the thing that the kids say and smash the like button, right? Go ahead and do that, and then have some conversations. Guys, thank you once again for joining on this Tuesday night live stream. I cannot tell you
fun.
how much I enjoy this. And we're gonna have to set up an after party. I'm just gonna have to get with Jason. You're gonna have to tell me how to do that on Patreon, and we're gonna be able to do it. So, guys, we'll see you next Tuesday. Bye bye.